it has not been an easy time over the last couple of years. And it doesn't really matter whether you support green, blue, or red. It all seems like they're all doing the same thing. So the question that I really want to tackle today is, why does it feel like the system is designed to keep us broke? That's the ultimate question. For those of you who are new, if you like videos centered around portfolio careers, okay, so really creating your own career, soft economics, anything centered around, consulting, contracting, all that kind of jazz there, then don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Michael Tabirade. I'm an independent management consultant and founder of the consultancy Mastery Group Limited. I said that so fast I almost messed up. So let's explore this stuff. Let's talk about why there is a bit of a barrier, why the system is set up this way. What is the system? And how we can better keep our money, so to speak. So the first thing is the policy problem, how the system screws workers. Now, is it really a policy problem? That is the question. The thing to think about here is we're in a situation where our society is heavily dependent upon what is known as the bond market and how the Bank of England responds, or the central banks respond. What does this mean? Well, a bond is essentially an IOU. It's a contract. It's essentially a way for the government to raise money for endeavors such as infrastructure, crises, innovation, all this kind of stuff there. And so what they'll do is they will essentially, sell these bonds to hedge funds, pension companies, insurance companies, all these companies that have huge amounts of money, billions, trillions amounts. Okay. And so what these sort of like private companies do is that they get leverage through loans through banks and other institutions to basically, buy these things or whatever it may be. Point being made is money is given to the government and they use that for whatever they need to use it for. What ends up happening is that however that money is used, it is put into the money supply, okay, whether this is via banks or whatever it may be. And that money may be used to create bank loans, credit, mortgages, etc., which increases demand for people within our society to essentially buy stuff, okay, because there's more money in the system, there's credit, okay. And so once things are bought more, organizations, businesses, companies will start to raise their prices to control the expenditure of different things, thereby increasing inflation. And once you have an inflationary environment, you start to increase interest rates. And if interest rates are increased, then of course, the appreciation, the yields, the capital that investors have in certain things increases too. But for those people who have that credit or mortgage or whatever it may be, that increases because the interest rate has increased. So it has a knock-on effect. So it all starts with the bond market and what the government decides to do. Now, there is nothing necessarily wrong with borrowing money and all this kind of stuff there. However, it becomes challenging if that money is not used for productive things, because really and truly, if we're looking at the debts that countries have, I think the UK has roughly 1.26 trillion or something like that. That may be okay relative to the number of assets that the UK has, okay? Like assets that actually has a monetary tangible value. Then actually it may be okay. Assets could be in the form of land or, technology or buildings, etc., versus not having any assets at all. Now, there are situations where the Bank of England, okay, or other central banks will buy back these bonds, okay, that the government had sold off to these big organizations, okay. They buy it back through what's called the secondary market. And essentially, when they buy it back, they are now owner of these bonds. And so the interest rate that, again, these hedge funds, whatever it may be, charged on the UK as an example, is removed. But in order for the Bank of England to actually buy back these bonds, which we call gilts, by the way, in the UK, they have to create digital money. That just has to happen. They have to create it. They create it out of thin air. And so that creation of it puts more money into the monetary supply, but they can control whether it goes in, out, all that kind of stuff there. It's taken back to the HM Treasury, and then it's literally for, UK government to spend it how they want to spend it. Why am I saying this stuff? I'm giving you an idea of how the whole demand and supply thing works in relation to inflation and interest rates, because it affects things like fiscal rules. Okay. Why is that important? Well, if you have, person A lending out £100 to a government, and they say that the government needs to pay back £5 every single year, and then the £100 afterwards, they like to see that the person that they're lending the money to has good discipline. Okay, governments are known for paying back their money, but the good discipline comes in the form of a fiscal rule. So, making sure that we don't have a deficit over a certain amount, or making sure that we don't overspend, or whatever it may be. You can check what the fiscal rules are based on what Rachel Reeves has set based on October 2024 in the autumn budget. This affects us because those fiscal rules affects our taxes. It affects our taxes. This is why there's been an increase in, minimum wage of £12.21. Not only does it affect organizations and companies who are in a situation where they may feel like they can't afford that, but it automatically puts those people earning £12.21 in a tax earning bracket potentially. Okay, so they can pay taxes. So it all contributes. £40 billion of, pounds of worth of pounds, should I say, of money that is now contributing to the government. But it comes back to what I said at the beginning. How productive is this money? Okay, this is not even taking into consideration the whole health inequalities aspect when it comes to, mental health, physical health, nutritional health, all of this kind of stuff. It doesn't even take into consideration income inequalities, all that kind of stuff there. Now, if you bear that in mind, this is what is known as a stealth tax or fiscal drag. So you basically keep you either make some changes when it comes to minimum wage or whatever it may be, but more specifically when it comes to fiscal drag, you don't really change anything. So they've decided to freeze the threshold of tax-free money. I think it's £12,570 or something like that. I say that with some accuracy. That they've chosen to freeze it until 2028. 2028. It's crazy. And so this is where the stealth tax comes into play. I've written here, more people pay 40% tax without a real pay rise. There's a real issue and there's a real problem when it comes to the fact that our wages are not going up in line with inflation. They're just not going up at all. And so when we think about all of this stuff, it comes to a point where it makes sense why it works against us. Now, there's another point I want to make. The system, i.e. bonds, the Bank of England, the government, etc., all of that kind of stuff there, is set up in a way where the employee doesn't have a choice when they are taxed. They get taxed as soon as, their payments are processed via, where PAYE is taken out, pay as you earn is taken out, national insurance, income tax, pension, X, Y, and Z, all of this different stuff. Whereas the person who makes the money for a limited company, okay, they get a choice. Now, they still have to pay taxes. Don't get it twisted. But they can decide to be more efficient with their taxes. So they can decide to become an employer and pay themselves a salary of tax-free allowance of £12,570. They can ensure that they expense different business expenses, which basically, helps to lower the sort of load when it comes to taxes and stuff. They can bring on their partner as a company director. Okay, there are so many things that can happen in order to minimize and lower taxes. Can you do that as an employee? Not in the same way, no. And so the point being made here is that becomes the system. And so this is why there is a focus on working people. Of course, working people, and there was a clue of this anyway, does also relate to contractors and consultants and all of those different types of people who are kind of like one man, one woman band individuals. They still contribute to tax, whether you're inside of IR35 or outside of IR35. I would argue the inside of IR35 individuals are probably gross making a lot of money, but when it comes to taxes, contributing the most. And this is with a lack of security and benefits, okay, in many instances. And so it gets to a certain point where if over, I'm making this up, over £550 on average, you're not making as an inside IR35 contractor, then it doesn't really necessarily make sense. So there's all of this kind of stuff to bear in mind. This is what we mean by the system. The system. We're talking about how and why we pay taxes. We have to be specific about what we mean by system. And so really and truly, whether a party is Labour, neoliberalist, this, that, blah, 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 you can understand the mechanics of why they do what they do. That is the system, essentially. Because now they've got pressure to make these payments, etc., etc. So the next thing is the trap, the tax trap. And I think I've kind of gone into this already, if I'm honest with you. But let's get into it in a bit more detail as well. So we have here the fact that, okay, let's say, for example, you earn about £50,000. I think I've written here the cliff edge is £50,270. When you cross this salary, 40% tax plus 2% NI equals 42% marginal rate. 42% marginal rate. So really and truly, you could be, I remember back in the day, the 50s, the 60s, yeah, money, we're talking money. And even now, it may be sort of money for a lot of people. And of course, it's benefiting. But it got to a point where it's like, what is even the point? I'd rather just make just below that so that I'm not taxed as much. And it can feel very demoralizing for many people, you know. Whereas when it comes to dividends or capital gains, you could be taxed as low as 20%. Of course, there are things to bear in mind and all of this kind of jazz there. But yes, you can be taxed as low as 20%. So we have to remember that tax is a way to manage inflation. And when we think about income tax and national insurance tax, of course, there is income tax regardless of whether you're self-employed or not in many instances. But national insurance, you could argue, is a second income tax. Of course, they contribute to different things. You know, one focuses on, I believe, contributing towards national insurance, if you want to call it that. Okay. And what I mean by national insurance is, I know I'm talking about NI, but really I'm talking about paternity pay, maternity pay, the state pension, all of that kind of stuff there, benefits, etc., etc. Whereas the other contributes more so towards different departmental focuses within the government, whether this is education, health, etc., etc. This is why you get the pie chart that kind of like breaks down how your money is contributed to different stuff. But it's whether you feel it. Do you feel there is a difference? And that's the thing. There is also a statement that says that the bottom 10% pay 12% of income on VAT versus 5% from the top. Now, of course, I don't want to just say sweeping statements because I don't think it's just that simple. However, you can see why there is a disparity. So it's really important to understand this stuff. Now, before I continue, where have you felt the system rigged you, so to speak? Where do you feel it the most? In housing, in taxes, in wages? Where do you feel it? I know for me, the mortgage is a mofo right now. But if I'm honest with you, I felt it properly, I would say last year. Definitely. Where I was like, wow, I'm really part of the squeeze. You know, I'm earning a certain amount. It's the most I've ever made before. La di la la la. However, these people are still trying to take my money. So you got people who are making crazy amounts, or they're making six figures, or whatever it may be. But the taxes element is killing them. And so this is where you hear a lot of people talk about lifestyle creep and this and that. We'll get to that in a second. But the reality is it's not easy. It's not easy for many. And I'm not even talking about my situation. I'm talking about people who are in situations where they're just starting out, or people who are on that sort of like a cliff edge amount of £50,570. Again, if you're interested in working with me, you can complete the form below and we can talk about how we can essentially help you find the opportunities you need to find, whether this is in a hidden job market or setting up yourself as a contractor. The third thing I want to talk about is the systemic barriers, so the invisible walls to wealth. Okay. Now, we've all heard this, and this is the fact that the average house price is roughly, I've usually said 8 to 10 times, but it's roughly 9 times the amount of your earnings for most people in the UK. Of course, this is inflated based on the rich and wealthy and all that kind of stuff there. But 9 times versus 4 times maybe 20 or 30 years ago. That's mad. That is crazy. So you have to think to yourself, who can really afford to jump on the career ladder? And the thing is that multiple increases when wages don't increase. So this is all frustrating stuff to bear in mind. I've written here £1.1 million lifetime rent bill. This is from the Resolution Foundation, from renters. 1.1 million on average people will be spending. That is crazy. Imagine that in the stock market. A 10 to 12, 14% return. It'd be insane. The other thing I want to recognize is that when it comes to, again, student loans, that's another thing that eats up a lot of your money. I mean, I was lucky enough to pay off my student loan early because of the fact that I was getting paid weekly at a good wage because of contracting, but not everyone's in that situation. So does university have to cost that much? What is the return on investment when it comes to university? Who's ever done that analysis? Somebody probably has, but I would love to hear or see what data there is on that. So, in terms of a quick bonus, this is how I believe you can at least become more efficient, okay? Now, the reality is, I talk about limited company and all that kind of stuff there. But there are a number of multiple things that you'll need to do. It kind of doesn't matter how much you make, but you need to make a commitment to making sure your money is in an account where it grows, where it appreciates. That is the first important thing. So utilize ISAs, stocks and shares ISAs. You got the pension ISA, all of that kind of stuff there, cash ISAs. Utilize them. Right now, you're looking at a cash ISA of roughly 4.5% or whatever, some higher, some lower, whatever it may be. But there's no point your money sitting in a place where it is not working. Also, there is the opportunity to invest. Of course, this whole tariff situation is causing dire constraints when it comes to making decisions of investing or holding when it comes to your stocks and shares or index funds. If you were to forget everything, just focus on the S&P 500. Just focus on that and put your money in that. Whether it's going up or down, just continue to put your money in that. They call it pound cost averaging because on average, when you continue to put your money in some sort of fund, okay, especially in the index as opposed to stocks and shares, it goes up anyway. That's its direction. That's the whole, like if it's the S&P 500, the top 500 performing companies in the world, it doesn't matter if the first one now becomes 501, it's going to be replaced by another performing one. So it's always going to have an up trajectory. Bear this in mind. And so it's important to put your money in these spaces continuously. If it's only £50, start off with £50 a month. If it's £100, do that. If it's, I know you see these YouTubers are doing £500, £700, all this kind of, don't watch them. Do what you can do and decide whether you want this money to accumulate or to distribute. That's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to say is level up your job. Level it up hard during this time. But because of the way the time is set up, people are more cautious with their spending. You're not going to be making unnecessary purchases, all of this kind of stuff there. Fight to get a job that pays you better. Of course, it needs to be an environment that makes sense and is conducive to your portfolio career goals, but find a better role. This is where you need to start speaking to recruiters. If they're not reaching out to you, reach out to them. You can still go into their websites, put in your information. You can still call these individuals. Be proactive about it. Have your pitch ready. Talk specifically about what niche you're in. Are you in the digital transformation niche? Are you in the finance niche? Are you in the energy sector? Are you in the environment and rural space niche? Are you in the marine or defense niche? Be clear. Are you a project manager, program manager, business analyst, accountant, whatever it may be? Just know what specific type of role that you're looking for and start to develop your skills, evidence your skills, articulate it well. This stuff becomes insanely important because whether you decide to get a promotion, a new job with more money, or you start to go into contracting, because there are contracts. I mean, Rachel Reeves, I believe, announced 600 million in terms of funding for research and other endeavors. Then there are opportunities. It's just that they're a bit more hidden by nature. Okay. And so you have to be that persistent fly that is continuing to find those opportunities and apply. Be ready. Don't just find them and not be ready. You have to be ready through your CV. Get someone to check it. Maybe get AI to support you in that, but not get it to do everything. All of that kind of stuff there. Practice what sort of questions you may be asked. Be clear about the value that you provide. And so consulting, or should I say contracting, and promotion and or new job is through the same job market. Just slightly different recruiters, slightly different approach. You just have to be more ready, more flexible. It's not that deep. This is where you start to get money. Yes, it's more risk adverse. This is where you start to get more money and you can pump that into other endeavors. Okay. If you do an outside of IR35 contract and you're consulting, then this is where you utilize your limited company properly. This is what you do. You could still open up a limited company and divulge your money through your limited company, whether you are, employed or not. You can still do that. You just use that as a way to fund your assets, etc., etc. That's another way to do it. So you don't have to be in a business. You can set up a limited company and do it that way. But again, seek an accountant for more advice on that because I'm not the right person to talk to. And so that's what you do. And slowly but surely, as the money starts coming in and you're utilizing all these assets and ISAs and all this kind of stuff there, you use it to diversify. You start thinking of different ways to make money. When I think about myself, there are things I've been doing for free and stuff I'm still doing for free. But there's also stuff that is turned into monetization. So again, YouTube is an example. It's becoming a monetary vehicle for me. The odd coaching session here and there is additional cash. My consulting contract at the moment is my main source of income. Okay. And then there are other things floating around, I'm starting to get some small stuff from the stocks and shares, ISA and all that kind of jazz, but not enough to brag or gloat about. The point being made is that you have to start. It doesn't matter where you're at. You have to start and be consistent with it. Don't just change your mind. But I would say the best place to start for most people is probably an index fund. It's the easiest thing to think about. Then naturally you start thinking about whatever it may be. But you'll notice that I talk a lot about the markets, the economy, socioeconomics, bonds, this, that, blah, 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 a little bit of politics. Why? Because it positions me as an opportunity for opportunities within the market. Whether that is my money or me as the asset. So hopefully this all makes sense. So I'm not going to go through the summary, but what I will say is the system is made up of policies, taxes, how the government enforces fiscal rules against their situation when it comes to their debts, and what the Bank of England or central banks do in relation to bonds and managing inflation. That is the system in a nutshell. Okay. And so you have to find ways to understand the tax code and find ways to be more efficient with how your money is being taxed. So it's about playing to win. Okay, it's about playing to win. Of course, if you want to see more videos centered around this, let me know. But if you want any support or help, then just message me. I think my diary is quite booked out at the moment, if I'm honest. But yeah, we can still sort of back and forth if need be. If you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers and contracting consulting, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.